نستعينه ونستغفر ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد. Today's lesson, we are in Tafsir, I should say, the Tafsir class. What number of Tafsir are we in today?
27.
We are on the 27th lesson of Tafsir. 27, lesson number 27. And what we're dealing with today is the compilation and actually the order or sequential order of revelation. Last week, we went over Suratul Iqra. And we mentioned how the seerah goes hand in hand with the tafsir of Quran. And we stated that we're going to go through the tafsir of the Quran, going through the sequential order. We said sequential order of the revelation of the Quran. But as we go through this point, there are a few things that have to be understood. So we're going to talk about this subject today, right here, the sequential order of the Quran. I wanted some reading material for you guys, but in the absence of that, one of the scholars of the past, he said that knowledge is graphs. Knowledge is a graph. So we're going to have a little graph here at the end of the Quran, at the end to go through. Here, the first thing we want to talk about is the Quran. Everybody say the Quran. The Quran that we have today, in the order that we have it, is not the same order that it was revealed. Everybody knows that, right? Yes. Okay. How did it get to the state, to the affairs that it is right now? Just some brief history so that we can know what we're doing and why we're doing it and how it got that way. The Quran was revealed first, Suratul Iqra, then Mudaththir, then people have questions about what comes next. Even actually, Mudaththir coming next, some people say Noon, Suratul Noon came after Iqra, and there's different speech about that. What the reason why the Quran is in the order that it is today is because this is the way the Prophet ﷺ set it up. But that's just a general answer. To give the answer kulliyan, generally, let's go through this. First, we have the Quran as it came down during the time of the Prophet, okay? We have the Quran in the time of the Prophet. Then after the Prophet, we have the Quran in the time of Abu Bakr, okay? Then we have the Quran in the time of Uthman. These are the three stages that the Quran took to get to the point where we have it today. And we call this Quran what? The Uthmani Mushaf. Mushaf for the heaven. We call this the Uthmani Mushaf. How did we get and why do we constantly talk about the Uthmani Mushaf? That's the subject matter of today's lesson. And I'm going to give you some history about that. During the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the companions, let's go this way. Before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died, there was only 4 people, 4 Sahaba, that were noted for having memorized the entire Quran. Did you know that? 4 people. One of the people's names is Zayd ibn Thabit. Everybody say Zayd ibn Thabit here. Then we have, and he was the scribe of the Prophet. Then we have Ubay ibn Ka'b. I say Ubay ibn Ka'ab. Who's Ubay? Did we learn about Ubay before?
He asked to read that Quran, Surah Al-Bayyinah.
Right, so the Prophet ﷺ was ordered to recite the Quran to Ubay. Right? And when Ubay heard that, he said, Allah mentioned me? He mentioned me, and then what happened? He burst into tears. Remember that. He burst into tears. And as for Zayd, Zayd was the scribe of the Prophet ﷺ. Whenever some Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, he would send for Zayd and tell Zayd to come with the ink pot and the pen, or the bone, the scapula, the bones of an animal where they would write on it. And Zayd would come and he would recite it to Zayd. Then after Zayd wrote it, the Prophet ﷺ would have him recite it back to him to make it clear that what he had written was correct. Then you also have Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Mu'adh ibn Jabal. Everybody say that name. Mu'adh ibn Jabal. I hear some people say Mu'az. No, it's Mu'adh. And you stick your tongue out. Like you say the word thee. Say thee. So Mu'adh. And now Mu'adh was considered a scholar amongst the Sahaba. It's one thing to be considered a scholar, but to be considered a scholar amongst the Sahaba, that means that you had a lot going on. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Mu'adh, he used to lead the people in salah when the Prophet wasn't around. People used to wait for him to come so he could lead them in salah. We have the famous story that he would pray with the Prophet, Isha, then go back to his people and lead them in salah, and they were waiting for him. We also have the famous story where the Prophet ﷺ, the people came and they asked for someone, and the Prophet sent Mu'adh to them. And he said he's going to be their judge, he's going to be their teacher, he's going to take care of all their affairs for them, because that's who Mu'adh was. And he said, let there be the first thing that you call the people to, and it was Tawheed Allah, that they should worship Allah alone, that they understand about that. And we have that, that's a famous hadith about who Mu'adh ibn Jabal was. And the last person is called Abu Zayd. Abu Zayd. And I forget exactly who Abu Zayd was. I have to go again. I had forgotten. I had wrote some down and I forgot about Abu Zayd until today. Walhamdulillah. So here are the 4 people that memorized the Quran in its entirety during the time period of the Prophet ﷺ before his death. Other than this, there were many people, many of the Sahaba, who had memorized some portion or parts of the Quran. And the whole Quran was available, but it was not available in book form. So in the time of the Prophet, there is no book called Quran. You understand? I mean, actually placed inside a book. We have the Quran. It's a book, but not in book form. Why is that? Can someone tell me why? Well, no, that's what it was. You said it was in parts and pieces and bones and stones and pieces of bark. That's true. But why was it not in book form during the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Because he didn't want to mix it with the hadith.
No. The answer was because he did not want to mix it with the hadith. No. But to answer the question, because during the life of the Prophet, the Quran was still being revealed. It was still being revealed. And Allah's Messenger ﷺ was telling people where to place different ayat as they came down. So it was incomplete as a book in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. As for your statement, he did not want to get it confused with the hadith. There is a statement that the Prophet, for a period of time, forbid the Sahaba to write down what he said, so that they would not confuse the writing of the Quran with the writing of the ahadith. But once it was clear that they knew the difference between the hadith and the Quran, he allowed them to write down the hadith. Because that clarified that misconception, Meccan? Okay. So now that's during the time of the Prophet. The second period we have is the time period in the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And during the time frame of Abu Bakr, we have the Quran being placed in book form. Placed in book form. Now, when we say placed in book form, the Quran was gathered. Why was the Quran gathered? What was the thing that began to make Abu Bakr as-Siddiq gather all the pieces of Quran? Now, how was the Quran before this? It was in parchments and leaves and bones and stones gathered all around the Muslim Ummah, which was very small at that time, right? So during the time frame of Abu Bakr, when we say gathered in book form, actually I don't like this term. It was gathered, rather. Instead of saying gathered in book form, it was gathered and compiled together. I won't say put in book form, but it was compiled and put together. The reason why I canceled out gathered and put in book form is because what was taken care of was the surah. In the time of the Prophet, the ayat were all over the place. Some people learned these ayat, some people learned that ayat. After the death of the Prophet, when there was a war, the war the Muslims had of the Murtadun, the people who accepted Islam and then went back on their Islam after the death of the Prophet, and many of the people who had memorized the Quran, a lot of the people who had memorized the Quran, pieces over here, were dying. Then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, on the encouragement of Umar ibn Khattab, everybody know the story? Yes. Umar came to Abu Bakr and he convinced him to write the Quran, have the Quran gathered together. And Abu Bakr did not want to do it. Then finally he did it. And then they gathered Zayd ibn Thabit. And Zayd ibn Thabit went out, and this is Zayd right here. The scribe, they chose Zayd. Why did they choose Zayd? Because Zayd was young. Because Zayd was one of the people who actually wrote the Quran. And when they say young, they say that because his mind was sharp. And he had a good memory. And he was one of the people who had actually written the Quran in the presence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what Zayd did was very particular. Zayd went and he gathered the Quran together. He knew the whole Quran from memory, but he didn't depend on that. He went and gathered it from whoever had it written down in the time of the Prophet, in front of the Prophet. Do you understand his tartib, his minhaj, his methodology for gathering the Quran? He went and got it from whoever had already memorized the Quran, and they had it written down and in the presence of the Prophet. So it's a very strenuous and strict criteria through which Zayd ibn Thabit went through to gather the Quran together. And that's all he did. He gathered the piece of the Quran together, and what he made sure of in the time of Abu Bakr was that the surah, the different surah, were intact. What do we mean by intact? Right, so they were all together, not broken up. So that the beginning of the surah was here, and all the ayat to the end of the surah. That's important. That's the extent that what he did. He made sure that there were 114 surah and there were 6,000 plus ayat to those surah. Is that understandable? We good? Now, in the time of Uthman, and the reason why he did it, what was the reason why he did it? Out of fear that the Quran might be lost, right? Because most of the people who had memorized the different parts of it were being martyred. Now in Uthman's time, actually, what happened to this Quran, this Mus'haf? After Abu Bakr had the Mus'haf written, what did he do? He placed the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr with Hafsa. Hafsa, who was Hafsa? Hafsa, the daughter of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And she is also who? One of the wives of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa radiyallahu anhum. So the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr with the surah, all the surah intact, was gathered together and given to whom? Hafsa. That's where that parchment stayed. Then after Abu Bakr passed away and Umar passed away, Uthman ibn Affan, he became the Khalifa. And Uthman, the people came to him and said, Uthman, save the people from disagreeing in the book of Allah like the Christians and the Jews disagreed on their books. Why did they come to Uthman and say that? What was happening in the time of Uthman that was different from the time of Abu Bakr? To answer that question, in the time of Abu Bakr, how big was the Muslim Ummah? It wasn't that large. But in the time of Umar, the Muslim Ummah grew 5 times its size. And so when Uthman ibn Affan took over, now you have a large Muslim Ummah and majority of the people are non-Arabs. Why is that important? Because they speak different languages and they're not familiar with the tongues of the Arab, the dialects of the Arab. So in gathering this, the gathering of Abu Bakr, he just had to gather the Quran, all the different pieces of the Quran together. He didn't have to worry about it being lost or people forgetting how to recite it. He just gathered it together because once they had it, they would know what to do with it. Now, in Uthman's time, he had to make sure that not only did he gather the Mus'haf together and make sure that the surah were intact, he had to put them in order. He had to put them in a particular order. So you see in the Mus'haf of Uthman, he takes from the surah, the intactness of the surah, and he places them in a particular order. He puts Fatiha first. He puts Al-Baqarah second. Last, he puts Surah An-Nas. Who does he get to do this work? He gets Zayd ibn Thabit. And not only does he get Zayd ibn Thabit, he gets a few more people, 3 other people, to help along with that process. Okay? And some people said he got a 12-man group of people to go through it and gather the Quran. Now I'm going to stop here and we're going to go through our lesson. I have a few things I have to read to you. This is our reading assignment for the day. You ready with that right there? Okay. This is called the first compilation. After the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the companions chose the best of them to be their leader. That was Abu Bakr, and he took over the affairs of the Muslims. The first issue that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu had to deal with was the issue of apostasy. What is apostasy? For those who don't know, who might be listening, apostasy is that you, after becoming Muslim, you go back to kufr, okay? Some Muslims had accepted Islam during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ for political reasons, and immediately after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, they refused to give allegiance to the new Islamic state. Many of these so-called Muslims had given their allegiance to people who claimed to be prophets. Abu Bakr then undertook a series of wars that became known as the Wars of Apostasy against these people in order to consolidate the Muslim Ummah. During one of these battles, the battles of Yamama, and this happened in the 12th year after Hijrah, around 70 companions who had memorized the Quran were martyred. The death of such a large number of memorizers of Quran alarmed Umar, and he went to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhuma and said, "Many of the memorizers of the Quran have died, and I am scared lest more die in later battles. This might lead to the loss of the Quran unless you collect it." Notice the language. He said, unless you collect it, gather it together. Umar not only realized the danger of this great loss, but also proposed a solution. Abu Bakr replied, "How can I do that which the Prophet ﷺ did not do?" Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, the one whom the Prophet ﷺ trusted the most in all his affairs, could not even think of undertaking a project that the Prophet ﷺ had not done nor ordered to be done. He was worried that such a project might be considered an innovation in the religion. But Umar continued to convince him, exhorting him of the merits of such an idea and providing to him that such a project was in no way an innovation. Umar realized that this act, and the reason why it's not an innovation, just to speak on that, an innovation in the deen is to begin something, to do something that the Prophet ﷺ did not do in this religion. Did the Prophet write the Quran, have the Quran written in his lifetime? Yes. And there was a reason for that. And they told this the maqasid al-sharia, the objective of the sharia. So this is what Umar ibn Khattab was dealing with when he said, no, this is not an innovation, because the Prophet had it written for the purpose of it not being lost, so that people can benefit from it. Now that is being threatened, so let's gather it together so it won't be lost. Does everybody understand that point? Yeah. Okay. So it's keeping in the same spirit of what the Prophet ﷺ had done. Umar realized that this act did not qualify as an innovation in the religion, since the compilation of the Quran was not a religious act per se, but rather an act that was of the general benefit, the maslahah, to the Muslims. He continued to convince Abu Bakr until Abu Bakr understood Umar's arguments and agreed to the project. They both decided to put the companion Zayd ibn Thabit in charge of collecting the entire Quran in one manuscript. Abu Bakr told him, "You are an intelligent man and we do not doubt you. You used to write the Quran, the revelation for the Prophet ﷺ, so we want you to collect the Quran." Not right now. They chose Zayd because he was the person best suited for the job for the following reasons. He was the primary scribe of the Prophet ﷺ, and it was because of this that Abu Bakr said, "You used to write the revelation for the Prophet ﷺ." This is also shown by the above mentioned narration in Al-Bukhari, in which the Prophet ﷺ ordered for Zayd to be called. Once after the Prophet's death, some people entered upon Zayd and asked him, "Narrate to us something from the Prophet." He responded, "And what can I narrate to you? I used to be a neighbor of the Prophet ﷺ, so whenever an inspiration came to him, he would call me to write it." Zayd therefore was one of whom the Prophet ﷺ had entrusted with the writing of the Quran. He had memorized the entire Quran during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. Anas ibn Malik said, only 4 people memorized the entire Quran before the Prophet's death: Ubay ibn Ka'b, Mu'adh ibn Jabal, Zayd ibn Thabit, and Abu Zayd. He was relatively younger than the other companions, and thus his memory was sharper. He narrates concerning himself that he was 11 years old when the Prophet ﷺ had arrived in Medina. They said, "This is one of the boys of the tribe of Bani al-Najjar, and he has memorized 17 surah. So I recited to the Prophet ﷺ, and he was pleased with that." He was present, we're talking about Zayd now, was present at the time of the Prophet's last recitation to Jibreel in the Ramadan before he ﷺ died. The famous successor, the famous tabi', Abu Abdurrahman as-Sulami, who died in 70 after Hijrah, said, Zayd witnessed the last recitation of the Prophet to Jibreel, radiyallahu anhu wa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and because of this, Abu Bakr relied upon him in its compilation, and Uthman put him in charge of writing it during the second compilation. He was one of the most knowledgeable companions with regard to the recitation of the Quran. Sulaiman ibn Yasar, he said, neither Umar nor Uthman preferred anyone over Zayd ibn Thabit when it came to the laws of inheritance and the recitation of the Quran. Amr ibn Sharahil al-Sha'bi, he said that Zayd ibn Thabit overwhelmed and conquered the people with his knowledge of the recitation of the Quran and in his knowledge of the laws of inheritance. Such was his stature among the companions that Umar ibn Khattab, Uthman, and Ali all appointed Zayd to be the one of the main judges and reciters of Medina, and he remained in this post until he passed away. The day he died, Ibn Umar said, "May Allah have mercy upon Zayd. He was a scholar amongst the people." Umar sent out scholars to take over all the judicial posts all over the Muslim lands, but he kept Zayd ibn Thabit in Medina so that he can give verdicts amongst its inhabitants. So that's another point. You see how Umar sent all the different scholars to the different parts of the Muslim world? but he kept Zayd for himself. So it's of little surprise that Abu Bakr, Umar, and Umar both thought of Zayd as the person who should be given the task of gathering the Quran. And once he had him convinced, paraphrasing here, he set about collecting the various fragments of the Quran from the pieces of wood and from the chests of people, from the memorization of people. He required at least 2 people besides himself. This is his criteria. He required 2 people besides himself who had memorized it, who had learned the verses from the Prophet ﷺ directly. So he didn't depend upon his own memorization alone. He depended on somebody who had learned those ayat from the Messenger of Allah himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's an important point. Not that they heard it from another Sahaba, but they learned it directly from the Prophet. Second, he had to take at least 1 written copy of the ayat written under the supervision of the Prophet. So he not only had 2 people who had memorized those particular ayat directly from the Prophet, he had to have found some paper. Because let's say, for example, someone wrote for the Prophet some ayat, but they didn't memorize those ayat, so they have the paper. And then 2 other people, they memorized those ayat from the Prophet ﷺ, but they don't have the paper. So now you have these things together, and then and only then would Zayd accept this as part of his compilation of the first Quran, the first Mus'haf. Everybody with me? Okay, I hope I'm not boring anybody. No. So, okay, and then it mentions here, at the end it says, the strict criteria employed by Zayd ensured the authenticity of the compilation. Even though Zayd had memorized the entire Quran and could have written it from his own memory, he still made sure that there were at least 2 other memorizers of the ayah and a written copy of the ayah before written under the supervision, the direct supervision of the Prophet ﷺ, before he took it into his compilation. The narration of Khuzaymah states, it indicates that Zayd was looking for the last 2 ayat of Surah At-Tawbah. Meaning, the ulama talk here and say that Zayd knew that there were some ayat missing from Surah At-Tawbah, because he had memorized the whole Quran. But he had not found anybody who had it written down. So he kept searching for it till he found it. He said, I found it with a person from the Ansar, and I did not find it with anybody else. And then he took that ayah and he placed it in its proper place. He said, so I put it in its proper surah. This point that Zayd makes, and he says, when I put it in its proper surah, is why the ulama say that the thing that Abu Bakr made sure of in the time of Zayd was that the surah were intact. And that Zayd knew, and the Sahaba knew, what ayat belonged in which surah. Everybody with me? Yes or no? Okay, now we have the Uthmanic Quran, or the Mus'haf of Uthman. It says here, there is some difference of opinion over the arrangement of the surahs in Abu Bakr's Mus'haf. Most of the scholars are of the opinion that Abu Bakr's Mus'haf did not concern itself with the proper order of the surah, for it was not meant to be an official copy that was binding upon the ummah. Others allege that the surahs were in the same order of that of Uthman. Also, it is alleged that this Mus'haf was written to preserve all the ahruf of the Quran. When we talk about the ahruf of the Quran was revealed in 7 different ways, and some people speak about this with regards to the Abu Bakr's Mus'haf, but none of those statements are authentic, can be authenticized, so that's why they say it is alleged, okay? What is true is that Abu Bakr's Mus'haf did arrange the ayat in each particular surah. Now we go to the Uthmanic compilation. After the death of Abu Bakr, Umar ibn Khattab took over the leadership. Under his caliphate, the territories of the Muslims expanded 5-fold what they had been. When he passed away, the Muslims controlled the remnants of the Persian Empire, Syria, Egypt, and part of the Eastern Roman Empire. After Umar's death, Uthman took over and continued the great legacy of his 2 predecessors. The Muslims were successful in waging jihad. We're going on here. It gets to the point where unfortunately the Muslims started differing among themselves with regards to the recitation of the Quran. The Muslims from Syria were reciting the Quran differently from the Muslims from Iraq. So then Hudayfa. And who is Hudayfa? Hudayfa. Who is Hudayfa? Hudayfa is the companion who is called Sirr al-Nabi. He's the person that the Prophet ﷺ used to do what? Keep his secrets with. He knew who all the munafiqeen were, just so everybody would know. So he went to Uthman. He said, O commander of the faithful, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, save the ummah before it disagrees about its book like the Jews and the Christians did before it. And so upon that, Uthman began to take action and gather the Quran, and now we're talking about the Uthmanic way. What Uthman did in his official copy, he put the order of the Quran, the surah, and then after that he had burnt. This is another part. He burnt all the other remaining masahif. Give me the pen, please. He burned all the other remaining copies of the Quran. Why did he do this? I'm sorry?
Not to difference opinion.
Okay, so there wouldn't be any ikhtilaf, any difference of opinion. What was the purpose why Abu Bakr collected it? Fear of losing the Quran, right? What was the purpose that Uthman gathered it? Fear of difference of opinion with regards to the Quran. Why? Because the different masahib that were around at that time had the writings of some of the Sahaba. For example, some Sahaba like Mu'adh ibn Jabal, he didn't write the whole ayat out. He would just write what he needed to remember the surah, and then his notes about that. Some of it was Tafsir. So the people afterwards would not know what part was Tafsir, which part was Quran, and these types of things. So in order to avoid this confusion, Uthman had all the other opposing and all of the copies burnt. Does that make sense? Okay. So he said, Ali ibn Abi Talib said concerning this incident, O people, do not say evil of Uthman, but only say good about him. Concerning the burning of the mushafs, I swear by Allah, he only did this after he had called all of us. He asked us, what do you think should be done concerning these recitations? For he reached me that each party is claiming that, for it has reached me that each party is claiming that their recitation is better. And this might lead to disbelief, and this might lead to difference of opinion amongst the people. So the people, there was, verily this idea of yours is an excellent idea. The action of Uthman was agreed upon by all of the companions. So they agreed upon burning. So even though Uthman is the one who did it, don't think that Uthman did this on his own. This was after making shura with the rest of the remaining companions of the Messenger of Allah. Yes? No, sir. I'm good. So after he made the Quran and placed the surah in particular order, he burnt all the other copies. He also sent, he had copies made, he sent copies of this mushaf to all the then known regions of the Muslim capitals, the Muslim worlds. And not just that, he sent with each one of them a reciter. You understand that? He sent with them a reciter who was a teacher in the recitation of the Quran, so that there would be no confusion about the Quran. And then, like I said, he had each of the other masahif destroyed. So here we have some differences between Uthman's mushaf and the mushaf of Abu Bakr. He says first, the reason that each of them compiled the Quran was different. Abu Bakr compiled the Quran in response to a large number of deaths of those who had memorized the Quran and in fear of it being lost. Uthman, on the other hand, compiled the Mus'haf in response to the inauthentic recitations that newcomers to Islam who were ignorant of the Arabic of the Quran were reciting. He wished to unite the Muslims on the proper recitation of the Quran and therefore ordered the eradication of all other masahif so that the people would only have one mushaf in their hands. Erase the board, boys. Okay. Number two, the number of people who were in charge of the two compilations were different. Abu Bakr relied on the person who was best suited and most qualified to do the job, that was Zayd ibn Thabit. Uthman, on the other hand, used the services of Zayd, but also 3 other companions, all of them who were known for their knowledge of Arabic and Quran. One of the people that was asked to do it, Ibn al-As, who was asked to do the writing of the Quran, they said his Arabic was similar to the Arabic of the Prophet ﷺ. So then, the number of mushaf ordered by Abu Bakr was 1, only 1 mushaf, whereas Uthman ordered several masahif to be made. Since Abu Bakr did not face the problem of inauthentic recitations of the Quran, he did not have to take the step that Uthman did انزل واسكت اجلس. Since Abu Bakr did not face the problem of inauthentic recitations of the Quran, he did not have to take the step that Uthman did in destroying all other written copies of the Quran. Uthman's decision ensured that all future copies would have to rely upon the original Uthmanic Mus'haf. Abu Bakr compiled the Quran from date palm leaves, wood, and the hearts of people, whereas Uthman ordered the rewriting of Abu Bakr's Mus'haf in the writing style of the Quraysh. Shukran. And the reason it was done in the language of the Quraysh and the writing style of the Quraysh, because it was revealed in that writing style, in that style of the Quraysh. The Prophet ﷺ was Qurayshi. But Zayd ibn Thabit was an Ansar. But the other 3 that helped him, they were Quraysh, and that was done on purpose to ensure that it was done in the language of the Quraysh. Okay? They even had discussions on how the letters were to be written, and they were written in the Qurayshi style. Okay? And they have speech about that. Then it goes on to say, Abu Bakr's Mus'haf, according to one opinion, did not concern itself with the arranging of the surahs properly. Only the ayat of each surah were arranged. You boys be quiet. Uthman, on the other hand, arranged the surah and the ayah in their proper arrangement. According to some, the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr was written to preserve all 7 of the dialects of the Quran as was revealed, but the Mus'haf of Uthman only included 1 style, and it left out the other opinions. However, this opinion is baseless, is not considered to be authentic. That's what I have thus far with regards to the gathering of the Quran. Now, the reason why we went through all of that was for this. Could you put it on the board? Is it coming up? It just اذهب إلى وراء. أنتم اذهبوا إلى وراء هناك. That's good enough. You're going too far. تعالوا. Okay, the reason why, again, like I said, we're mentioning this because as we go through the Quran and we go through it in the order that it was revealed, I don't want anybody to think that this is totally authentic. Because the Quran was sent down piecemeal, piece by piece, the actual order that it was revealed has not been preserved. We're spending this whole lesson just talking about this so we can understand that point, that the actual order that the Quran was sent down has not been preserved. And that wasn't the important part of the Quran, to preserve that particular part. You boys acting up today. أتريد ضرب? So, what we have some portions of it that we can follow, and then there are some portions that we're just going to have to rely upon what has been written with regards to that. Okay? And I was going to show you guys what we had compiled there. While we wait for that, I'm going to read to you another piece. This is called The Sequence and Revelation of the Present Arrangement. And this is by another sheikh with regards to the ulum of the Quran. And I guess we may not get that video today. It says, it has been stated earlier that the Quran was not revealed to the Prophet ﷺ in the order as it exists today. The order of its revelation was different and in accordance with the needs and circumstances of particular times. As soon as an ayah was revealed, the Prophet ﷺ used to dictate it to the scribes and instruct exactly where to place it and the surah wherein to write it. They would write it at the place shown by the Prophet ﷺ. No attempt was made either by the Prophet or by his companions to preserve the chronological order of the revelation. Hence, nobody remembered the exact order of revelation when it was completed. Hence, we may have some partial knowledge of the order of revelation of certain surah or ayat, but the chronological order of the entire Quran cannot be ascertained with authenticity. Does everybody understand that? Okay. In his book, Al-Itqan, by Imam As-Suyuti, he attempts to fix a chronological order of the revelation, and that's what we'll be using. We're using Imam As-Suyuti. He's a famous scholar of Tafsir. He gives us the chronological order, according to him, of the revelation of the surah, with reference to certain traditions and different narrations that we have. But in fact, they only affirm which surah are Meccan and which surah are Madani, and the chronological order cannot be totally authentically established. Recently, some Orientalists have tried to establish the order of revelations. First of them was a well-known German who started working on it, and thereafter it became a subject of great interest with other Orientalists. Does everybody know what an Orientalist is? An Orientalist is a non-Muslim scholar who studies Islam, but he studies it in a very perverse way. He studies it with his idea that Islam is wrong, and he tries to prove it through his science. It's similar to the racist type of science that we had here in America up until late, where they would say through science how black people were inferior or physically ignorant and all types of stuff like that, and they would use science to prove it. These are the types of games that these so-called scholars or Orientalists use to show that Islam is incorrect, or that the understandings that we derive from Islam and the Quran are incorrect. Does that make sense? That's exactly what they do. So one of the things I wanted to mention, and I guess you don't really have to go to that, we'll just do it here. One thing we want to mention is not to waste your time dealing with these people. Because one of the things they do, one of the tricks of the shaitan is to get you busy doing that which is less important. Arguing with Orientalists is something you don't have to do. You're never going to prove them, make them change their mind, I should say. You may prove them wrong, but you know the rule. Man opined against his will is still of the same opinion still. So they're not going to change their opinion, but what you can do is busy yourself. Let's read this. We'll go through this instead, okay? The compilation and sequential revelation of the Quran. It has been stated earlier that the Quran was not revealed to the Prophet in the order that we have it today. However, Al-Bukhari reports that when not equal are those believers who strive, who sit at home, and those that strive in the cause of Allah. The Prophet called for Zayd ibn Thabit, instructing him to come with ink pot and pen. When Zayd arrived, the Prophet told him, "Write, not equal to those believers who sit at home and those who strive in the cause of Allah." This incident shows the haste with which the Prophet ﷺ recorded the Quran. Zayd narrates, "I used to write the revelation for the Prophet, and he would dictate it to me. When he finished, he would command me, saying, 'Read it back to me.' So I would recite to him what I had written. The ayat were written and placed where the Prophet ﷺ instructed. No attempt by the Prophet or the companions was made to preserve the chronological order of the revelation. So whereas we have partial knowledge of the chronological order in which the Quran was revealed, the chronological order of the entire Quran cannot be achieved with total authenticity." Does that make sense, everybody? No. A non-Muslim scholar of Islam is called an Orientalist. We say in Arabic, mustashrik. Many Orientalists are insincere troublemakers who try to confuse issues, so be careful of their works and do not spend a lot of time debating with them. These devils only seek to waste your time and keep you from more beneficial activities. I say that again because the Orientalists do a lot of writings in English, and it seems like the Muslims spend a lot of time trying to read these Orientalist works as opposed to the works of Muslim scholars. And so you should not busy yourself with these weird writings that they do, but busy yourself with what the Muslims have written about the deen. Okay? Imam As-Suyuti, a famous scholar of the sciences of the Quran, and we know there's a difference between the sciences of the Quran and the science of Tafsir. The science of Quran deal with what we're dealing with now. The chronological order of the Quran, which ayat came when, and those types of things like that. Whereas this tafsir deals with understanding what those ayat actually said and what they actually mean. We understand the difference in that? So here, Imam al-Suyuti, a famous scholar of the sciences of the Quran, recorded a list by Muhammad al-Harith ibn Abyad and a poem by Burhan al-Ja'bari, both listing theories on the sequential order in which the chapters in the Quran were revealed. Suyuti wrote, after writing these and placing them in his book Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran, that these lists needed to be further researched as some aspects of them were apparently incorrect. And here we place this list. And here's the list. Go up. I took the time, I put the whole list here, and I just at this top part, I'll deal with that, and then we'll end here. Because we're going to be using this list, and I'm going to print this list out for everybody, at least McKean is, and this is the order through which we will be studying Tafsir, with slight deviation. And I wanted to show you the list and show you why we're going to do slight deviation. First of all, he starts off with Iqra. We already did Iqra. The next surah he places is Al-Qalam. We will not do Al-Qalam, and we will not do Muzammil before we do Mudaththir. Because we have an authentic narration from the Prophet ﷺ that he said, after I had finished in Hira, after I had left Hira, I was walking down around the mountain of Hira, and I heard something. I looked to my right, I didn't see anything. I looked to my left, I didn't see anything. I looked behind me, I didn't see anything. I looked in front of me, I didn't see anything. Then I looked up and I saw something, and I was scared. It frightened me. So it was the same thing that I saw up in the mountain. And so he went home and he said, Dathiruni, Dathiruni, wrap me up, wrap me up. وَصَبُّوا عَلَيَّ مَاءً بَارِدًا. He said, and pour over me some cold water. And while I was sitting there, it said, Ya ayyuhal mudaththir, kum fa'andir. So it says, while he was sitting there, it said, oh, you wrapped up in your clothes, get up and warn. And the surah starts to come. So we have an authentic narration stating on Jabir ibn Abdullah, stating that Mudaththir came directly after Iqra. And then we have other narrations that say that Muzammil came aqabat al-Mudaththir, that it came right on the heel of Mudaththir. Also in Sahih al-Bukhari, we have a narration where it states that he said, Zammiluni, Zammiluni fadaththiruni. He said Zammiluni, which means he was Muzammil also. So we're going to go Iqra, Mudaththir, Muzammil, and then Qalam. After that, he says Al-Fatiha. We're not going to do Al-Fatiha here. Why is that?
We did already.
Not only did we, why did we do it already? Because we're not, all the surahs of Ikhtilaf, we scroll up. Scroll up. These are the ones revealed in Mecca. If you go all the way down to the 83rd, keep going down, please. Here at this area, at the end, before the Medini period, is where, because there's three periods. There's the period that's clearly Meccan, there's a period that there's Ikhtilaf, and then there's a period that's clearly Medinan. We already did the middle period of all the surah that are surahs of what? Ikhtilaf. So in our list, we put the surahs of Ikhtilaf in the middle. And we're surrounding them with the ones that are clearly Meccan, and we're going to end up with the ones that are clearly Medinan. So that's the difference, and I wanted to explain to you all and take this time why our list is different from the one that they have presented here. Does that make sense? And I wanted to go through that order so that we're doing tafsir. And as a mufassir, you should recognize why you're doing the things that you're doing. Do I have any questions? If I don't have any questions, just to summarize again, there are three periods in the compilation of the Quran. What are they? What's the first period?
Meccan.
No. The first period in the compilation of the Quran was what? The period of the Prophet ﷺ. How was the Quran compiled during the life of the Prophet?
I'm sorry, can you push it again?
Okay, let me say it for myself. With regards to the compilation of the Quran, it has traveled through three stages. The first stage is the stage of the Prophet ﷺ during his lifetime, when the Quran was placed on and written on stones, on bones, on cloth, on tree branches, and certain people memorized it. 4 people memorized the whole Quran, but many, many people memorized parts of the Quran. That's the first period. The second period is during the period of Abu Bakr, where Abu Bakr as-Siddiq ordered Zayd ibn Thabit to gather the whole Quran, to compile it together, and make sure the surah were in order. Not in order, that the surah were actually, the ayat were placed in the proper surah, in their place. And he gathered that together, right? And he gave it to Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr gave it to Umar, and Umar gave it to his daughter Hafsa, right? Then we have the third period, and this is the period of who? Uthman. That's why we say Uthman, when we talk about the Quran, we say in the Mus'haf of who? And we don't say the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr. Do you understand that point that we always saying? Gone undisturbed, right? So, here in the Mus'haf of Uthman, he had Zayd along with 3 other companions, and some say 12, gather the Quran together, the ayat together, and put the surah in order, and compile it in a book, and then he made copies of it, and he burnt all the other copies, and he sent the copies that he made out to the different provinces of the Islamic world, and he went to, and at that point, the only copy you have left is Abu Bakr's copy that's with who? Hafsa. Okay? Now, after the death of Hafsa, Ali and Marwan, he became the governor of Mecca. He asked for the copy. Before Hafsa died, he asked for the copy of the Quran that she had been given from her father, the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr. She refused to give it to him. So when she died, he went and he destroyed the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr that was in Hafsa's house. And before or after, they said, he stood up and he said, I want to let the people know why I destroyed this Mus'haf. He said, the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr, of Uthman, was based on the Mus'haf of Abu Bakr. However, there's some differences in the way it was ordered and arranged. The writing style in the Uthmanic one was Qurayshi, and it was clearer because it was written for non-Arabs to read and everything like that. And I'm afraid that after some time, people are not going to be familiar with Abu Bakr's Mus'haf, and they're going to breed some doubt that there's something different between the two. Right? So I destroyed it so I can kill all those doubts. And I only destroyed it for that reason. So when we say the Quran that we have today, we don't have it in the order, the sequential order that was revealed. We have it in the way that the Prophet ﷺ intended for it to be, because Zayd knew, and Zayd knew how come? Because he was with the Prophet ﷺ during the last time he recited the Quran 2 times to Jibreel before his death in that last Ramadan. So, do I have any questions about that? Okay, I'll question you guys about it later on. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم والسلام عليكم.